An interesting question came up overnight about accidental damage of products in a shop and whether or not the customer can be liable for the cost of the damage. Well, this is a bit of a strange one because there's no hard or fast rule or law as to the customer must pay the retail price or the wholesale price or so on, but it's more a matter of construction of the problem and ultimate liability as to what might be decided in court. Now, there's potential civil and criminal liability, although it's quite unlikely that criminal liability would arise from this. But let's deal with that one first, because the only possible criminal liability that could arise is criminal damage, and this is defined in Section 1 of the Criminal Damage Act 1971, which is that a person who, without lawful excuse, destroys or damages any property belonging to another, intending to destroy or damage such property, or being reckless as to whether any such property would be destroyed or damaged, shall be guilty of an offence. Now, it's this reckless aspect of this definition that comes into play, because if someone is being completely reckless in a shop, then that might be sufficient for this part of the offence. I mean, it's quite clear-cut if someone deliberately, with intent, destroys property, picks something up and deliberately smashes it on the ground. There's obviously very little ambiguity there whatsoever. But as for the recklessness for the purposes of the Act was defined by the House of Lords in Crown and G of 2004, in which it said that a person acts recklessly within the meaning of Section 1 of the Criminal Damage Act 1971 with respect to a circumstance when they are aware of a risk that it exists or will exist, a result when they are aware of a risk that will occur, and it is, in the circumstances known to them, unreasonable to take such risk. And there's also an application of self-induced intoxication, in other words, being drunk. And this was in respect of a case of DPP and Majewski of 1977. And this still applies in the terms of recklessness for this case. So in other words, if someone is fully aware that there is a serious risk of this damage, so let's say somebody walks in with their dog or several children, and they are aware that all of this risk is there and that there is a serious risk of damage to the products, then ultimately they are being reckless and they may well be liable to criminal damage if it can be shown that it was so reckless that it deserves criminal punishment. And all of this comes about because a customer has an obligation to carry themselves with reasonable care whilst going about a shop. Reasonable care not to damage the products within the shop. Therefore, it's far more likely in most cases that this would give rise to civil liability as opposed to criminal liability. And the civil liability would therefore need to show the actual loss of said products and what monetary value that loss has accrued. In the case where it is a readily available product, then they've only really lost any of the wholesale costs and possibly shipping and packing and stocking costs rather than the ultimate retail value of the goods. However, perhaps in the case where these goods are no longer available or they are rare, perhaps it's a rare painting and this gets damaged, then it cannot be replaced. And if it's one of a kind, for example, there is only one set price for it and that retail price for the goods would have been lost. So ultimately, most shops are going to be quite reasonable if you break something by pure accident and you haven't been completely reckless, although it's much less likely if you have been completely reckless, you've got 2 or 3 children or a dog running around and they shouldn't be running around and they should be under your control, and this causes untold damage in the shop. Equally, if it is outright reckless behaviour in the shop, it may give rise to criminal liability, and if the damage is certainly intentional, then this will most likely give rise to criminal liability. So I hope this addresses the question. I hope that was interesting. Please give the video a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.